All right, up next is Jeff McGill.
Notes, Joe.
Notes is good.
All right.
I had notes too.
All right, good evening. I've served the last 25 years as a law enforcement officer, and when I started early on, there was a lot more things clear to me than there are today. What's never been out of focus has been my love for this profession, and those of you who join it, you have accepted the full duty of what it is that it means to be a law enforcement officer. And to me, that's truly amazing. You spend countless hours, you spend your own time, your own effort to learn the things that have to be done so that we can keep control in all our calls for service in what often amounts to orchestrated chaos. Now, over the last 6 years, I've been working in the area of law enforcement, mental health, and suicide. And I was drawn to these topics because I had to deal with my own mental health issues as it related to this job. I was 22 when I watched the first person die from a gunshot wound to the head. If I think back on it now, I can still taste the blood and gunpowder in the air. I was 30 when a suspect took aim at me with a 12-gauge shotgun and pulled the trigger. I went home, hugged my daughter a little tighter that night, and went back to work kicking doors 5 hours later. When I was 32, an officer in my agency was shot and killed by a suspect. I spent the next day washing the blood off his duty gear and watching it flow down the drain. All of these things and others left a mark on me. But when I was 35, my friend and partner of 10 years was shot multiple times in front of me during warrant service. And that, by itself, changed my life. I still remember him telling me what could have been his final words through his blood-stained teeth as I held his hand. Now, there's an unspoken rule for partners. It's your job to make sure each other goes home at the end of the night, and I failed to do my part. My partner didn't go home that night, and at the time, I wasn't sure he'd ever go home again. During the next 72 hours, I learned more about psychological stress and trauma than I had in my entire career. Anger, flashbacks, nightmares, sleep disturbances all became part of my life. Even when I knew what was going on and how these things were triggered, I couldn't stop it. I don't tell you this story because I think I'm special. Officers in this room have the same stories or worse. Some will talk about it, some won't, but we've all walked the same path. I'm here to tell you you're not alone, and this isn't new. Somewhere in middle school, junior high, you probably read the story about Achilles and the Trojan War. And while this is a great story, it often overshadows another epic myth about a guy named Ajax. Now, Ajax was Achilles' right-hand man. And Ajax went off to war, and he comes back, and he's struggling with the aftermath. And so while he struggles, one night he awakens, and he's having a night terror. He believes that the cattle in the field are an attacking army, and so he dons his armor and he grabs his sword and he runs off to battle. And he slaughters the cattle, believing they're the enemy. He goes back to his tent and goes to sleep. When he awakens the next morning, he's embarrassed by what he's done. And so he starts contemplating suicide. At that point, his wife goes out and calls to his friends. And she says, "The fury is gone from him, but from his words and deep grief, I believe he's thinking of doing some great harm to himself. But that's why I'm out here, my friends, to ask you to go inside and help him in any way you can. The words of friends can often cure a man in this condition." The story was written in the 5th century BC. And at that time, they were able to document post-traumatic stress symptoms and how they manifest in the body, and peer support and its benefits towards people who are facing these problems. What causes post-traumatic stress in each individual varies. But these benefits from peer support and other early iterations of treatment are universal. We can fix these things. Now, when I decided I was going to become an instructor, I accepted a new duty, and that was to ensure my students were prepared to deal with this job and everything that came along with it. And I trained them very hard to deal with the physical threats. But for many years, I failed to address the mental stress that comes along with this job. I didn't prepare them because I hadn't been prepared. Even when I first started learning about this topic and started teaching on it, it was often boiled down to feel-good quotes. And I don't know about you, but telling me that feelings are okay and it's okay not to be okay doesn't resonate. I'm your textbook type A personality like many of you, and I want to know that I can fight back against physical threats or mental ones. I want to know that I can do something actively to mitigate this problem. Officers have left agencies because of operational stress injuries. They've suffered in silence due to post-traumatic stress disorder, and they've died by suicide, believing no one would stand up and help them. We've all prayed that the ghost of no officer ever says that my training has failed them. But I'm afraid the training I've had has already failed. 2 officers that I worked with and trained with have died by suicide. We can do something to fix this. It's estimated that law enforcement officers in the United States will face between an estimated 188 critical incidents throughout their career. A research study that looked at 8,000 law enforcement officers across this country from large, small, urban, and rural agencies found that 16% of us had considered suicide. Look around this room, there's probably 100, 125 of us. The statistics suggest that between 16 and 20 of us in this room have considered suicide. You will walk past these officers at this conference. You may have a drink with them tonight. You may be one of them. Quickly do the numbers for your agency, and it'll keep you up at night. If that's not enough, we also know that when an agency representative, the sheriff, the chief, the chaplain are standing at the family's door, knocking to make the notification, they're at least twice as likely to be telling the family that the officer died by suicide than they are to be telling them they were killed by a criminal. This should keep our law enforcement executives up at night, thinking about what they are going to do to change our profession. Now, we can no longer be passive actors in our own salvation. 1,800 years ago, philosophers suggested what stands in the way becomes the way. Our internal monologue, which says we should save everyone, we should never seek help, and we should always be in control, is standing in the way of our own survival. And those of us in this room must choose to become the way our culture changes. Now, I've spoken tonight about duty. The duty of a law enforcement officer as you join this profession, the duty of partners and what they owe each other, the duty as an instructor and the duty as a leader. Now I'm going to ask each of you to accept a new duty. A third of us will face or deal with operational stress injuries throughout our career. What's become clear to me is a sentiment given to us by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius in 170 AD when he said, "Don't be ashamed. You have a duty to fulfill. So what if you're injured and need another's help?" If we had a choice, we would never send an officer to face a violent criminal by themselves. Don't leave this room tonight and allow the culture of silence to continue within your organization, within our profession. Silence is causing officers to fight alone against mental health issues. The time is now for everyone in this room and everybody else in our profession to openly fight this battle. That's what's going to change it. You have a duty to fulfill. So what if you need help? Thank you.
So another softball question, similar to the one I gave Dan. What's Jeff McGill doing? It's a street fight day to day sometimes. What are you doing to keep yourself in that resilient space and to continue to improve?
So for me, I am super interested in philosophy. And so I've been reading a lot of the ancient Greeks about how they dealt with these things. You know, they said long ago, there's nothing new under the sun, right? This is one of those things. You know, stress, trauma, this has long been documented, and we know how to deal with it. So I'm currently reading Stillness is the Key. So thank you, sir.
Absolutely. One more round of applause. Thank you.